Hey, good morning, Restoration. I am excited to be with you this morning and today. My name is Matt, and I am the pastor of Valley Church way down in Allendale, Michigan. And I am preaching with you today and filling in for your pastor, Brian, while he is away for the weekend. And let me just say, your pastor, Brian, what an amazing dude, right? Give him a hand from wherever you're watching from this morning. Brian and I are good friends. We've grown to love him over the last couple years. Just an amazing dude. And that guy, man, that guy has hair like you wouldn't believe, right? I admire that. I covet that. And he can pull off the skinny jeans like no pastor I know. So anyway, Brian's a cool dude. I hope you show him love all the time and appreciate him, because I know I do. So I'm excited to be with you this morning because I discovered something about Jesus recently that I wanted to share with you this morning. And here it is. Jesus asks really good questions. But before we get to one of his greatest questions in all the Bible, let me prime the pump a little and ask you a few questions. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to show me your thoughts, right? By sharing your comments online. If you're online, give us your comments to these questions. Would you rather, and which is better? So these are some very important questions, and a little warning, this could get a little heated and competitive with all of you online. So feel free to comment with each other, because these are really important questions, right? All right, first one. Here it is. You ready? Bacon or sausage? I know, right? It's a question for the ages. Now, we all know the correct answer is the one that clogs our arteries the most: bacon. You guessed it. All right, here's the next one. Crunchy peanut butter or smooth peanut butter? There's some heated debate about this one. So I think the right answer, smooth. If you're with smooth, you're with me. Now, here's a little hint. Have you tried peanut butter on toast? If you want some great peanut butter tips, here you go. Take some Pepperidge Farm butter bread. It's called some of the most amazing bread out there in the grocery stores. Get that, toast it, and then what you're going to do is you're going to get a little schmear. That's right, I said schmear. A little bit of butter on the toast first. Just a little bit of butter. That helps smooth out the peanut butter even more. Then put that smooth, creamy peanut butter on top of that. Then here's what you do. Sprinkle some cinnamon sugar on top of that. Unbelievable. Give it a try. That one's a free tip for you. Next one. Skydiving or bungee jumping, right? Skydiving or bungee jumping, which is better? How many of you are like, forget it, I ain't doing either. I'll stay on the ground, watch the rest of you die. Thank you very much. Now, for all the couples that are watching together online, here's a question. Being single or married? Don't answer that. That's a trick question. And finally, a question we can probably all agree on and raise our hands to, so to speak. Have you ever messed up in any way in your life? Right? There's something I think most of us can agree on, right? This is something we can all agree on. Maybe not readily and excitedly, but we've all messed up, haven't we? And that can actually be a beautiful and redeeming thing, and an amazing question in God's eyes, which I want to show you today. And like I said, I recently discovered something new about Jesus that I didn't realize as much as I thought I had realized. I read this book called Questions About Jesus that really influenced me and this message, and I want to share some of those thoughts with you today, because asking good questions was and is central and essential to Jesus' life and teachings. He actually asks far more questions than he has ever asked. In the four Gospels, Jesus asks about 307 different questions. Now, in contrast, he has only asked about 183. And get this, he directly answers very few of those 183 questions he has asked. Now, you get different interpretations of that depending on who you talk to, but it's somewhere between 3 and 8. So whatever number you go with, that's still a small amount of answers to questions. And that means that Jesus is like 40 times more likely to ask a question than he is to give a direct answer. Jesus is like the great questioner more than he's an answer man. Back to that thing that all of us have in common, though. We've all messed up in some ways. I know I have multiple times, many days actually. Whatever word or phrase we use, mistake, bad decision, failure, sin, regret, messed up, goofed up, screwed up. Most of us have some of that in our lives, don't we? And maybe some of us had all of that yesterday. Maybe some of us have had all of that this morning. All of us are open to the fact, unless you're like a complete and total narcissist, to something that sounds like, I totally missed the mark with that. I so wish I had handled that differently. Can you relate? This is where we find Peter one day in the book of John. Chapter 21 is such an amazing story of beauty and redemption. It paints a picture of what the church is meant to be, what it's supposed to look like, and it gives us a glimpse of restoration for someone who is living with their mess-ups and some regrets, maybe like you and I. And so in many ways, John chapter 1, it's a chapter for all of us. Now, let's dive into the story and start here with John 21, verses 1 through 8. Here's what the Bible tells us. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out, they got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. And then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. And so I love this part of the narrative and the passage here. In many ways, this is like a snapshot of what the church is meant to be. In the Gospels, fishing is a major metaphor for what the church should look like and what it's called to be. First, we hear Jesus say in Luke 5:10, from now on, you will fish for people, which is kind of like a pregame to the pregame in this story in John. And that's important. Hold on to that. Second, all sorts of people are actually invited to be in the boat without hesitation. Thomas the doubter, Nathanael the superstitious, John the one Jesus loved and the rational one, Peter the reactionist activist, black, white, rich, poor, Democrat, Republican, those who have their life figured out and those who don't, those who love church and those who can't stand church, those who go to Slabtown and those who go to Bubba's, good neighbors and even the bad neighbors who let their dog poop in your yard. In God's world, everyone is invited into the boat, and everyone has a place in the boat. Now, third, think about fishing overall. It's like bringing something from one kingdom to another, from water to dry land. And last, all of this depends and relies on Jesus and the care that he modeled for us, for you, for me. The fishing metaphor for Jesus was not about baiting and catching people like some trophy to mount on the wall or to throw back into the waters, but to actually get in the water and to meet people where they are and to care for people like we actually want to have a relationship with them, with love and compassion and time and sincerity and humility. And if our fishing is not guided by the care of Jesus, then what's the point, right? So here's where the disciples might have been distracted, you could say, as we drop into chapter 21. And we have to remember Jesus' challenge and calling to them just before this story. It's like they're fishing, but they're not really fishing, if that makes sense. They're fishing for fish after Jesus had told them, from now on, you will fish and care for people. Now, watch this. Dad joke vibes coming at you. Get ready. They were fishing for soul when they should have been fishing for souls. Word, right? That's a great dad joke and pun. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So now there's absolutely nothing inherently wrong. There's nothing inherently bad about fishing. But in the larger narrative of the story, there is some context. There's nothing wrong with fishing unless you've been challenged, gifted, and called to do and be something else, you could say. From now on, you will fish and care for people. So why were the disciples back to fishing? This is where it might take us back to the question that we can all relate to, that we all have common ground on, right? We've all messed up. And sometimes that takes us out of the game, doesn't it? Like the athlete who messes up and then for whatever reason can't seem to get his heart, his mind, his soul back into the game. So maybe it's because the disciples were simply following their leader, Peter, who had messed up. He had had some regrets over his denial of Jesus earlier, and that had kind of had this way of pulling him out of the game. Our fears and failures have a tendency to do that, don't they, sometimes? 3 times, the Bible tells us, Peter had denied even knowing who Jesus was when asked. I don't know him. No, I don't know him. No, I absolutely don't know him. And then the rooster crowed, and he was like, what have I done? Oh, I wish I had handled that differently. And so after Jesus was crucified, how would he not be living with some regrets and heaviness in his heart and in his life? Had he asked for forgiveness and tried to reckon with himself and with God? I'm sure he had. I mean, how could he not have, right? But might he also have been trapped and weighted down with the same feelings and thoughts that I have from time to time? Maybe you do too. I know God forgives me, but how do I forgive myself? And so, for whatever reason, Peter finds himself back to fishing. Maybe trying to get away from the challenge, the gifting, the calling that Jesus had empowered into his life. But here's the beautiful part. God always pursues us. God always pursues you. God seeks out Peter to remind him of who he really is. Look at verse 4 and 5 again. John 21, 4 through 5. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. Jesus shows up when we least expect it, where we might even least expect it. Maybe on the shore of the horizon of our hearts and lives. So John 21 is absolutely a picture of the care the church is to provide in people's lives. And it's also about the restoration and care that God provides in our lives, in your life. This care and restoration for Peter begins in verse 9. And this is super cool. This is fascinating to me because it begins with brunch. Because redemption is always better with some bagels and fluffy eggs, right? Oh, and the bacon. Don't forget about the bacon. We already covered that one. Let's pick up the story. John 21, verses 9 through 14. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Now, I wonder what was going on in Peter's heart and in his mind in this moment. Was he excited to see Jesus? Was he nervous to see Jesus after his denial? Did he rush up to him, or did he kind of keep his distance a little? When he looked into the fire, what did he see? This is also pretty fascinating to me that John wrote about a fire somewhere else too in John 18:18. He says, it was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire that they had made to keep warm. Peter was also standing with them, warming himself. Peter's three-peat denial happened around a fire. And now he finds himself by another fire. But this time, this moment, this fire is a totally different fire and moment, because Jesus is actually at this fire. And Jesus built this fire himself. Jesus is about to ask Peter 3 really good questions after Peter denied him 3 times. These 2 stories can't purely be coincidental, can they? Now, also don't miss this, and I love the picture of this. It all begins with breakfast. Jesus and his disciples just hanging out on the beach. Jesus blowing in the fire to keep it stoked, cutting up some fish, cooking it perfectly, right? And I'm sure Jesus' seasoning and spice blend was spot on. Probably some smoked paprika, a heavy load of garlic in there, eating together, laughing, reminiscing, caring for one another. And if you ever wonder what and who God is like, this is what God is like. Because God always meets us at the table of our hearts. And don't forget about this. The greatest criticism and the most consistent criticism Jesus always received was that he ate with sinners and people who messed up big time. Matthew said this once in the Gospels in chapter 9, verse 11. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" This is the kind of table that Jesus was and is most comfortable at, with sinners and whores and players and jerks and everyone who has made a mess of things. And do you know what else? Do you know who else Jesus also ate with? Good friends who denied even knowing him. That's our Jesus. And this is exactly what God is like and who God is like. In Revelation, Jesus declared this vision of how far and wide his love is for you and for people. It says this in Revelation 3:20, "Here I am. I stand at the door and I knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will." It doesn't say I might. It says I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. What's the first thing that's going to happen and that we'll participate in on the other side of this side? A feast and a really, really good meal. I mean, come on. Restoration and redemption and care and compassion takes place better in a dining room than a boardroom, doesn't it? Because Jesus always meets us at the table of our hearts. And now we get to the questions. Now we get to the good questions and what this story has been building towards the whole time. John 21, verses 15 through 17. In my Bible, it's subtitled, "Jesus Reinstates Peter." Remember that. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Some thoughts about what's going on, kind of underneath what's going on here. First, this happened within the context of community. Now, it wasn't meant to embarrass Peter, not at all, but for a deeper sense of support, you could say. Healing oftentimes happens best in community and within trusted relationships rather than in isolation and on our own, doesn't it? Healing in community says, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this. And we can support one another and hold each other up. Second, our mess-ups and deficiencies, they never ever disqualify us from participating with God. In church world, you hear a lot of talk about who's in and who's out, right? There's a lot of discussion on disqualifications for ministry and participating with God. But get this, in spite of all the years of Bible that I have read and studied, and in spite of coming across so many people in the Bible who like literally walked away from God and messed up so much worse than many of us. I mean, Moses, come on, murdered a dude. I have yet to come across a text or a passage in the scriptures that suggests after someone owns their junk, who is real and authentic about who they are and whose they are, still being disqualified from ministry and a life with God. In my mind, this idea and attitude does not come from the Bible. And you're free to disagree with me on that if you want. Because in my mind, again, in my eyes, in God's eyes, and Jesus' world, you can't fail your way out of family. Even after saying 3 times, essentially, hell no, I swear to God, I don't know the guy. Peter is still welcomed and invited into ministry and cared with the kind of compassion that I think our world and a lot of Christians can only dream of and give cheap lip service to. And like I said, you're totally free to disagree with me. But I think as a Jesus follower, that a Jesus follower should be marked and known by who and what we are for rather than who and what we are against. This is who Jesus was, right? This restoration is also anchored with reminders. And this is a really important part to me in this story. It's anchored with reminders. What kind of reminders? Of who we are as disciples, of who we are as the church and Jesus followers. And this is what we tend to miss a lot, to be honest. We usually think it's all about us. Don't we? Meet my needs, Jesus. Meet my needs, church. This story comes along and kind of smacks us upside the head, though, doesn't it? Listen, friends, we are not here to be fed. We are here to feed. Peter, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Don't just sit there waiting to be fed. Peter, do you love me? Then tend my sheep. And don't just sit there waiting to be tended to. Disciples of Jesus show their love for Jesus by loving, tending, and feeding others. You can't love God without truly loving others. You can't love others without truly loving God. They are mutually exclusive. How we tend and care for Jesus' sheep exposes whether or not we are really truly a genuine disciple of Jesus. Now, also within this story of restoration, is a picture of what I would call realness. What's important here and striking to me is that Peter recognizes that Jesus knows Peter better and more fully and more accurately than Peter even knows himself. And when faced with his own brokenness, Peter becomes the most real he's ever been, in my mind. He gets real with Jesus like he has never done before. His brashness everywhere else in the Gospels is replaced with his realness. I know how bad I messed up, and I know how much I hurt you, Jesus. I so wish I had handled that differently. I hope you know just how much I love you. But what matters most is not what I say, but what you know about me, Jesus. Help me find that again. Please, help me find that again. Now, let me kind of round the proverbial third base and zero back in on the question. John 21:15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Now, that brings up some interesting questions, right? Like these what? What are the these that Jesus is referring to? Now, there's lots of speculation, interpretations, and suggestions out there. Do you love me more than all of this? Your fishing, this life, your boat, the stuff in the boat, the fancy motor, this vocation, your stuff. Do you love me more than you love these? More than you love the other disciples and the dudes here? Or maybe it's both, right? These people and all the other stuff. Do you love me more than these do? Do you love me more than they do? And so what if the answer to which interpretation is right is yes? What if it could have been and is probably all of them? Remember, God meets us at the table of our hearts. And depending on the season or the chapter of life, can't all of these kinds of things block us or distract us from loving Jesus? Jesus said over and over again, abide in me and my love for you. Abide in me and my love for you. But all too often, don't we abide everywhere else sometimes? Don't we? Which raises the even deeper question beyond the question that Jesus asked. What are the these? What are the these in your life that compete with your love for Jesus? Our journey of discipleship will never be perfect. And that's a good thing. Because as maybe you've heard, nobody's perfect. And actually no perfect people are found or allowed in the family of God. And that's kind of the point. That's kind of the promise of the good news that Jesus shared with us. We all mess up. We all have that in common. And Jesus still shows up. And Jesus still meets us for breakfast. And even cooks it and serves it for us and eats with us at the table of your heart. Which is a beautiful, beautiful thing when you stop and let that sink in. Right? There's a dance step called the tripudium. It was actually one of the preferred dance steps for processions and recessions at Christian festivals and celebrations in the Middle Ages. It's a dance step that's still used today. It's 3 steps forward and 1 step back. 3 steps forward and 1 step back. Now, when I think about that, I think Peter's journey in this story is a lot like that. We all mess up and take a step back from time to time. With Jesus, with ourselves, with others. But that doesn't mean that the music stops. That doesn't mean that the dance is over, though. The good news about the tripudium step is that as long as you keep moving, even though you may step back, you will keep moving. There are 3 steps forward for every step back, and that will always lead you to the good news of Jesus and some amazing grace back up on the beach with breakfast and bacon. Don't forget about the bacon. So the call, the invitation from this story, no matter what, no matter who you are and what you've done, no matter where you come from, no matter what the chapters in your story have been like so far, the call and the invitation from this story is to just keep dancing, to just keep moving forward, staying in motion, to get out of the boat, and get back to Jesus so that he can cook for you and you can eat together for the first time or once again and once again and once again. But remember, it's not just your feast. It's a feast that's meant to include others. Too many of us dine with Jesus and don't invite anyone else to the table. Do you love me more than these? Man, that's a really good question, isn't it? That reminds us of the care Jesus has for us and for you, and the challenge and the call to care for others. Would you pray with me? God, would you just simply help us get out of the boat, to dance and make our way back towards Jesus so that we could feast with him and discover the kind of hope and compassion and care that literally changes everything in our lives and in the world around us, so that we could then share that hope, that compassion, and that care with someone else. Help us absolutely love more than these. In your name we pray. Amen. Hey, God bless Restoration. It's been an honor being with you today. May the light, love, and grace of Jesus be in your life always and forever. Amen.